Hello and welcome to GameSat. The 3DO, the Atari Jaguar, and the 32X. It's time once and for all to figure out which is the best of these three niche systems. Or niche, if that's what you happen to say. And for the sake of the episode, let's pretend that the 32X can't play the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Genesis games available, but only 32X specific games. I think that makes it a bit more fair. Anyway, here's a brief and simplified overview of each system. The first 3DO machine from Panasonic was released on October 4th of 1993, featuring a $700 price tag. I bought one on that day with cash I had saved up, but keep in mind I am generally not considered an intelligent person. CD-ROM was the only medium that the software came on. It has a 32-bit CPU running at 12.5 MHz, 2 MB of RAM, and a megabyte of VRAM. Pretty powerful for its time. The Atari Jaguar was released a bit later than the 3DO, debuting on November 23rd of 1993 at a price of $250. I never picked one up, but I had a couple of friends that did. The games came on cartridges, but a CD-ROM player was released 2 years later at about $150. The Jaguar features a 16-bit CPU running at 13.3 MHz, along with two 32-bit chips handling various tasks running at 26.6 MHz each. The console has 2 MB of RAM. The 32X from Sega was an add-on to the Genesis/Mega Drive that increased its power, debuting a year after the 3DO and the Jaguar on November 21st of 1994. It could play games on cartridge or CD if you had a Sega CD attached. It features two 32-bit CPUs running at 23 MHz each. On paper, the Atari Jaguar certainly wins. We'll just leave it at that for right now, and you can judge for yourself looking at the games for the rest of this episode. Now let's get into the games, and I'll be comparing them across a few different genres. After each, points will be given. Winner will get 2 points, second place will get 1 point, and last place gets 0 points. Obviously, at the end of the episode, whoever has the most points is the best system. But first, let's start with the pack-in games, the original pack-in games. Crash and Burn from Crystal Dynamics was the original pack-in for the 3DO, and it also came with a multimedia demo disc. This is a post-apocalyptic racing game and features some texture map polygons which were very impressive at the time. You race 3 laps on each track and you try to shoot down the other racers since this is the future. You get damaged easily and you can repair yourself and even restock your weapons at the pit stop between laps. The music is kind of interesting. It's not quite CD quality like you'd expect. There are plenty of full motion video or FMV scenes showing the characters and their cars because this was the 90s. The game itself lacks polish, but it was decently fun, at least for a short while. Cybermorph from Attention to Detail and Atari was the pack-in for the Jaguar. This one's a 3D shooter. Well, basically it's a shooter. Each area is free roaming and you can go wherever you'd like. Your mission is basically to collect enough of these little yellow pods in each level. Sometimes the enemies will snatch them up and fly them away, so you've got to shoot them down to free the pods. Almost like a 3D Defender if you think about it. Once you collect enough of these pods, the warp gate opens up and you can exit the level. The graphics are Garou shaded polygons. Personally, I feel that flat shaded polygons have aged better than Garou shaded ones, but they work well enough for this game. Unfortunately, there's no music, but you do have a very bored lady that talks to you as you play.
Good work.
The graphics might not be as impressive as Crash and Burn, but as a game, it's definitely more interesting.
Well done. Where did you learn to fly?
The 32X did not originally come with a pack-in game, so it cannot compete in this area. With a pack-in game that will hold the interest of more people for longer, the winner is the Atari Jaguar. Second place goes to the 3DO because, unlike the 32X, it at least had a pack-in. Alright, let's move on to see what each system had when it comes to platformers. The original Gex from Crystal Dynamics was the premier platformer on the 3DO. You spend a lot of time in very large levels looking for TV remotes. Your guy, who's voiced by comedian Dana Gould, makes a lot of wisecracks as you play, some of which were funny back in 1995.
Who opened the can of whooping?
Sadly, the game has a very rough frame rate and lots of slowdown. Still, it's by far the best platformer on the console.
This for Johnny!
And then there's Johnny Bazooka Tone. I can't even figure out how to stay alive in the first stage of this game. But hey, at least it scrolls smoothly, unlike Gex. Lastly, we have Soccer Kid. Here, you try to attack enemies with your soccer ball. It's super easy to lose the ball, leaving you defenseless. Also, you jump with the A button, so everything feels backwards in this one. This isn't a game that I'd recommend. The Jaguar has Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tails from Imagitech. This one's super bad. You immediately die in one hit, and you often can't tell what hit you before you're already dead and the screen blacks out. The graphics are colorful, but they're not really any better than the Bubsy games on the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. The sound and music are also very poor, with Bubsy saying the same thing each time a level starts.
Oh sure, let's all torch the Bubster.
And that's gonna be often, because you'll die a lot. Then there's Pitfall: The Mayan Adventures. This one was ported by Imagitech. This is a much better game than Bubsy. It has some great animation and fast scrolling. It also only scrolls at 30 frames per second. The first level, though, is super dark and it's tough to see where you need to go. But if you can get over this is a quality game, and it definitely has its fans. And then, of course, there's Rayman from Ubisoft. This one is amazing, and the developers of the other games should feel bad that they got owned so hard with this one. I mean, this is how you do it. Rayman gets new powers as he advances in his journey, and get this, the game is actually well designed. The first thing you notice is how colorful and detailed the graphics are. It puts consoles like the Neo Geo to shame. The music isn't bad, but the sound quality of the instruments are all well below the 16-bit consoles of the time. It probably goes without saying, but this is the best platformer on the Atari Jaguar. Knuckles Chaotix from Sega is probably the best known platformer on the 32X. It's basically a Sonic game without Sonic, except this one tethers you to a friend at all times. It's a tolerate it or hate it kind of deal. The stages are gigantic mazes with very few enemies, but still with some slowdown here and there. As a game, I learned to tolerate it and even have lots of fun, but it is an acquired taste. The music, though, is outstanding. Pitfall: The Mayan Adventure is also on the 32X. It looks and plays mostly like the Jaguar version, including the 30 frames per second scrolling. This is because supposedly the 32X can't scroll its plane of graphics faster than that. But I don't know, several other games are able to without issue. I like how it's brighter than the Jaguar version though. Unfortunately, the sound and music aren't as good. And then there's Tempo from Sega. The backgrounds here can be incredibly trippy. You can find your butterfly girlfriend who adds some instruments to the music but goes away if you take too many hits. This is definitely a weird game, and they just went crazy with this one. It did see sequels on both the Game Gear and the Saturn. Thanks to having Rayman, the win goes to the Atari Jaguar. Second place goes to the 32X as it has better stuff than the 3DO, but barely. Fighting games were immensely popular when these consoles were available, so let's see what each of them got. The 3DO's got you covered with fighting games like Way of the Warrior from Naughty Dog. It uses digitized characters because, well, this was the 90s. The graphics here are technically impressive, but unfortunately there's nothing impressive about the gameplay. It's clunky at best and the characters feel like they have very little weight to them. But this was only Naughty Dog's second game, so I guess we can forgive them.
That's a nice.
Capcom also brought out Super Street Fighter II Turbo on the 3DO. This, of course, is an excellent fighting game, though you're probably going to need to buy a new controller if you truly want to appreciate it. The graphics and gameplay all move fast, though apparently they weren't able to figure out how to get the parallax scrolling in. Yeah, it looks kind of weird seeing the floor slide underneath the elephants here. What matters is the gameplay, and it doesn't falter here at all, and the fantastic arranged music only makes it even better. Crystal Dynamics gave 3DO owners a pretty good port of Samurai Showdown. It matches the arcade in most ways, and it even keeps the zooming of each stage intact. The quality of the sound effects and voices took a hit, and the game's frame rate does chug in some spots, which slightly affects the gameplay. But overall, it's still a great port to a non-Neo Geo console. Let's not forget Shadow, War of Succession from T&E Soft. This is as bad as it gets, people. Everything is awful here. The graphics, the audio, and especially the gameplay. I swear, it gets easier the more you crank up the difficulty. Moves are tremendously frustrating to pull off, and the game moves so fast that you don't have time to anyway. 3DO literally let anything show up on their system. There's also Primal Rage from Probe, released only in Japan. This conversion of the arcade game can be kind of fun to play. Naturally, there's lots of blood. Again, this was the 90s. This one even has full motion video segments before each fight, but you can turn them off. All things said, not a bad conversion. Rage. On the Jag, we got Kasumi Ninja from Atari. Gotta admit, the graphics in this one looked pretty nice, if it were a 16-bit game anyway. But the gameplay is very laggy. The moves are tough to pull off and the AI is very over-aggressive. They clearly thought that having blood everywhere would make up for it. Sadly, this game just doesn't feel professionally made at all. Or how about Ultra Vortec from Beyond Games? This one plays better. In fact, it might play too well. I practically beat the entire game on normal using only the kick button. The graphics are pretty choppy, and you can even see the JPEG compression artifacts in the background. That's kind of amusing. Primal Rage showed up on the Jaguar CD from Probe. This one gets rid of most of the FMV scenes from the 3DO version. It takes up less screen real estate and also runs at a slower 30 frames per second. Other than that, it's pretty much identical to the 3DO game. Rage. Lastly, we have Fight for Life from Atari. This is a 3D fighting game, maybe even the worst one ever to exist. If you can believe it, someone from Sega AM2, the team that brought us Virtua Fighter, made this game. Imagine leaving Sega to go work on an Atari Jaguar game. It was never truly finished before the guy bailed. That'll teach you to leave Sega. What was left was kind of patched together and released in this state, and it's just awful. You creep towards your opponent, few of your moves reach, and your hits barely take any life, so the matches last forever. You can steal the opponent's moves when you beat them, though. This concept had potential, but Atari's never been good at managing itself, so this one just wasn't meant to be. Round 2. The 32X has Cosmic Carnage from Sega. This game gets a bad rap, but it's a little better than you might think. It's not great, mind you. You can equip armor before a match, and the more you equip, the slower you move. That armor can get knocked off during the fight, making you more vulnerable. This is naturally accompanied by glitzy scaling effects. The fighters themselves are assembled with segmented sprites, which gives them a marionette type of look. The game can be kind of clunky, but hey, at least some of the music can be pretty good. Mortal Kombat 2 from Probe is probably the premier fighting game on the 32X. I'm personally not into the 2D Mortal Kombat games because I've always sucked at them, but a lot of other people say that this is one of the best conversions of the second game to a home console, and I can see that. The gameplay is fast and responsive, the graphics are good, as is the audio. If you like Mortal Kombat, then no doubt you will like this.
Round 1, fight!
Primal Rage is the only fighting game that's on all three of these platforms. The 32X version can't match the others in terms of graphics and sound. Also, all of the sound effects are hard-panned either left or right like an Amiga game, though the music remains centered. I will say, however, that out of these three versions, this one feels the best. The control is the smoothest in this one. It's also uncensored, so you can pee on your opponents. This is great news if you're 12 or 13 years old and super edgy.
Raid.
Virtua Fighter by Sega AM2 is my favorite fighting game here. This is a 3D fighting game and they did an extremely good job porting this one over. It is so much more impressive than Fight for Life on the Jaguar. It's quick, responsive, and fun, even if it does have a dumb block button. They even added an anamorphic 16:9 widescreen mode. In fact, I believe this is the only true widescreen game on any of these three consoles. They even did a great job with the sound. It's a fantastic conversion of a really good game. Last but not least, we have WWF WrestleMania the arcade game. Yes, this counts. You need to win 2 out of 3 rounds, and you only need to worry about draining your opponent's life bar so that they die forever, just like any other fighting game. Pinning opponents happens automatically, which is nice. The worst thing about this one is that it's not a huge upgrade over the Genesis version, but it is definitely better.
Who does he think he is?
With great ports of Mortal Kombat 2 and Virtua Fighter, the win is edged out by the 32X. Second place goes to the 3DO with its excellent port of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Alright, now let's check out shooters. It was kind of a weird time for shooters. The 3DO didn't have any conventional shooters, but it did have things like Burning Soldier. This is a rather simple crosshair shooter that's laid on top of a full motion video background. There certainly isn't much to it, but the video isn't horrible and the music is actually pretty good. It's definitely worth checking out if you like these kinds of games. Or how about forward-scrolling stuff like Total Eclipse from Crystal Dynamics? You have no idea how utterly mind-blowing this game was at the time. It's a pretty simple game where the more enemies you shoot down, the more your life bar is refilled. But graphics like these were just so far ahead of what we had seen at the time, especially outside of the arcade. You could even engage in full screen rotation at will, which was just for show, but still, it's cool. A cool soundtrack helps this game, but when it comes down to fun, there's not a whole lot here, especially these days. Or how about maybe Shockwave from Electronic Arts? This is a 3D free roaming shooter. Well, mostly free roaming. You fly around taking out aliens and other objectives, but mainly shooting aliens. There are actually quite a few games on the console which have gameplay which is fairly similar to this. This one's pretty fun, but the stages can drag on a bit.
Our second main objective, Giza, is directly ahead. Surviving Union forces seem to be retreating to Cairo.
The Jaguar had Raiden, ported over by Imagitech. This is a good, if somewhat chunky version of the vertical shooter. You have 2 different weapons you can collect and power up, as well as 2 different types of missiles. There's no rapid fire option here, so you'll be mashing that fire button a lot. The game is limited to scrolling at 30 frames per second. The music is hard panned left or right like an Amiga game, but fortunately the sound effects are centered. If you want a horizontal shooter, you have Trevor McFur in the Crescent Galaxy. You start each stage in outer space. Eventually, you'll make it to a boss. Defeat it and you'll be granted access to the planet that you chose to go to, and these stages are even longer. This game really throws everything at you right away. There's no break and you have to be on your toes the entire time, as there is lots of stuff on screen. There's also a lot of low-quality JPEG compression artifacts in this one all over the place. Yep, it's a new era in gaming. There's no music at all, but I'm betting that if it did have music, it would probably be crappy music. The Jag also has Defender 2000. This attempts to update the classic Defender. It does some cool things, but I feel it would be even better if your ship were smaller and the game moved a bit slower. It's really easy to run into things that you don't see and die. The fine control just isn't there on this one because everything's just so huge. At least classic Defender is here, and I feel this one plays better. Let's not forget about Blue Lightning on CD from Attention to Detail. This is a forward-scrolling shooter, and it was the pack-in for the CD unit. Gameplay-wise, it can be fun. At first, it seems like it's really tough to stay alive as your hitbox is rather large, but you adapt. Like Total Eclipse, you can also roll your craft at any time, though it can get really chunky here. I ended up having some fun with this one, and I appreciated its aesthetics. Make no mistake though, this is not Afterburner.
Watch for heat-seeking missiles.
The 32X did have Afterburner though, in the form of Afterburner 2 Complete. This is an excellent port of the arcade, though it runs at a lower frame rate. But it still had all of the excitement and fun of the original. How could we have a game that's this close to the arcade at home? The sound and music are all there too, and it's incredible. Everyone likes this game, unless they don't. Space Harrier is the same story. Excellent port from the arcade that I couldn't believe how accurate it was at the time. Yes, it's slightly letterboxed and at a lower frame rate, but it's still just as fun. Seeing near-perfect ports of some of these arcade games excited me to no end. They didn't even have to compromise at all on the sound, music, and voices. I had tons of fun with this one, and I still enjoy playing it, even though there are perfect ports everywhere else these days. There were also original games like Shadow Squadron from Sega. This is a free-roaming 3D shooter. Fly around and take out the enemies that your mission objective demands you to. This has great-looking flat-shaded polygons that I feel have aged pretty well. The gameplay is also really fun, though the stages can get pretty long and it's tough keeping your shields intact. Colibri might be the closest thing to a traditional shooter on the 32X, and it's anything but. You're a hummingbird, and your job is to destroy the evil hornets who are hogging all of the flowers so your hummingbird pals can enjoy their sweet nectar. Since you're a hummingbird, you have lots of different weapons at your disposal. Some stages have you flying around freely. Others scroll like a normal shooter and you just have to make it to the end. Others still, you have absolutely no idea what the hell you're supposed to do. The graphics are amazing, and the game has absolutely no issue scrolling in many different layers at 60 frames per second. It's definitely unique, and yes, it can even be fun. Let's not forget Darkseid from Frontier Developments. This only had a PAL release. This game really isn't much more than a 3D version of the old game Asteroids. The graphics are really ambitious for the 32X, featuring full texture mapping everywhere. The stages, though, can be rather long. It's definitely a good-looking game, but you might get bored, like I do. For having some really good shooters, even if they're not traditional ones, the win goes to the 32X. The 3DO barely edges out the Jaguar for second place since it has lots of shooters similar to Shockwave, which means there's plenty to play. Okay, we saw shooters. Now how about first-person shooters, which were basically just getting started at the time? Doom came to the 3DO in April of 1996. Art Data purchased the license for a hefty sum but didn't have the staff to actually make the game. It was eventually handed off to Rebecca Heinemann, who was able to score the source code from the Jaguar version and make the 3DO port here in 10 weeks. So yeah, this is basically a game made by one person in a very short time. And it shows with a horrible frame rate and extremely laggy controls. It's probably the worst port of Doom ever. One thing it does have though is awesome arranged music that's exclusive to this version. There are other first-person shooter games like Escape from Monster Manor from Electronic Arts. Basically, this is just a maze game where you need to find the exit while finding keys as well as keeping your life and ammo up. The game doesn't render a floor or a ceiling, so it moves super fast, and that can make being precise with the controls, well, challenging. Aside from that, it plays well. Then there's Killing Time from 3DO. This one makes things more interesting by adding a creepy story and ghosts that appear and tell you things. There's even a little bit of backtracking to do. However, the frame rate is so low and the controls are so laggy that it's difficult to play here in the future. Still, I really like the idea behind this one.
Invitation.
Or how about Space Hulk? This one looks awesome, but I've never really understood it. It's nearly impossible for me to stay alive, as tons of identical enemies swarm me like crazy, and they do not stop. This one isn't my thing, but some people really like it. Again, for their time, the visuals are incredible. There's even a cool version of Wolfenstein 3D. You can play the original levels or the Escape from Wolfenstein levels. This was done by the same programmer that did Doom on the 3DO, but as you can see, this one is running a ton better. That's what happens when you have time and extra help. It controls as well as it can, which these days leaves a bit to be desired, but hey, it was the 90s. I really like the pace of this version, and the arranged audio helps keep the excitement level up. Doom was released on the Jaguar in November of 1994. This version runs great, and it works well despite only having 3 buttons. The frame rate feels like glass compared to the 3DO version, and the game is quite responsive. There are a few things missing, of course, but back in 1994, having a console version of Doom was a sight to behold. Unfortunately, this version doesn't have any music during the gameplay. That's because the chip that handled the music was too busy with collision and the such. Even without it though, this is still a fantastic port of the game. The Jaguar also has Wolfenstein 3D. This one moves quickly like the 3DO version, but being on cartridge, it can't have the cool new music. The music and sound that's here isn't bad though. Overall, this is a great port of Wolfenstein 3D if you want some pre-Doom first-person shooter action. Alien vs. Predator from Rebellion is one of the more highly praised games on the console. This one allows you to play as an alien, a predator, or a colonial marine. Yikes, there's that JPEG artifacting again. I see this a lot in Jaguar games. Anyway, it can be tough to kill your enemies as either the alien or the predator without taking lots of damage in the process. The marine dishes out a lot more punishment, and you have a better chance of surviving if you play as him. This one's moody and slower paced, and it works for the game. There isn't any music, but instead a lot of ambient sounds. This one mostly lives up to its hype. Doom came to the 32X at its launch in November of 1994. That's right, this game came out a week before the Jaguar port of Doom, making it the first port of Doom to a home console of any kind. And it was a very rushed port as they wanted to make it available at launch. Unfortunately, that took its toll on the game. It plays in a smallish window, lots of content is missing, and the music was unoptimized at best. Still though, the game runs smoothly and plays great. However, I'm not sure if I prefer having this music or just no music at all. Hey, at least it's playable, and not only that, but fun! This game ended up being the only first-person shooter on the 32X. The Jag gets the win for the superior version of Doom and the excellent Alien vs. Predator. Second place naturally goes to the 3DO since the 32X only had Doom. Now let's check out racing games, because I like racing games and I'm the one who's making this video. The 3DO had a few racing games like BC Racers from Core. This is basically a kart racing game without the items. This came after the Sega CD version and they seem to have removed the ability to brake. They also removed the ability to attack to the left. And as you can see, it's pretty choppy despite the simple graphics. This isn't one of Core Design's better efforts. There's also Road and Track presents The Need for Speed from Electronic Arts. Now this is more what I expected from the 3DO. The graphics look next generation for their time, moved at a frame rate which was plenty good for us simpletons in the 90s, and it even had real cars. As a game, it's extremely slow, laggy, and shallow, but that didn't prevent me from loving the hell out of it at the time. Unfortunately, there's no music. I usually just put on something else. But the 3DO version is the only one that has this sweet guy.
A little one-on-one, a little mano-a-mano. Come on, you know what to do. Let's go.
May his memory live on forever. And of course, there's Road Rash, also from Electronic Arts. This is the first platform the 32-bit iteration of Road Rash appeared on, and all in all, I think it's still my favorite version of the game. It's more or less a remake of the original game on the Genesis, but gussied up super nice. Try to win the race and beat up your opponents on the way, or get beaten up. This one features some of the best usages of licensed music as well as full motion video in a game. Everything is funny because the developers knew that this was a video game and that games are supposed to be fun. And fun it is. This is not only the best Road Rash game ever made, but in my opinion, also the best game on the 3DO. The Jaguar had Atari Karts, oh yes. You guessed it, this was their take on Mario Kart, but instead with characters you've never heard of. You race around tiny tracks and there are some items, but not really anything in the way of weapons. It controls fine and is actually pretty easy. What am I stuck on here? Let me go! The graphics are extremely colorful and run at a constant 60 frames per second. The music and sound effects are all hard panned in one direction or the other like an Amiga game. It does get kind of boring rather quickly though. There's also Checkered Flag. This is basically Atari's take on Virtua Racing. It uses similar flat shaded polygons and I like the look, but man, this game is quite jerky in motion. The control is also pretty rough as your car flies like crazy, out of control. Good luck. Though the tracks are fairly short, there are 10 different ones. If only they had spent a bit more time developing it, but that's not the Atari way. Here's Super Burnout from Shen Technologies. You race a motorcycle on a bunch of different tracks featuring good control, super fast speed, and great music. A couple of the tracks even feature time of day changes. This one's pretty simple, as it's clearly inspired by arcade games. Nothing wrong with that. I guarantee you I would have loved it had I played it back in 1995 when this came out. Hell, I still have a lot of fun with this one, but unless you like arcade racers, you might feel a bit underwhelmed.
Best time, final lap.
And here's Supercross 3D. Oh god, and it's from Tiertex, oh no. Oh man, this is gonna be horrible. Oh, are you seeing this? Words just cannot describe this. Seriously, this is bad. I'm amazed they released this. Actually, this is Tiertex, so no, I'm not. Then there's World Tour Racing, which is on CD. This one tries its best with the polygons, some of them are even texture mapped. This one is almost playable, but as you can see, it gets confusing really fast thanks to the low frame rate. However, I do like how there are 3 different views that you can choose from. Oh, and the music is absolutely insane. The 32X also has BC Racers from Core. This has all of the same flaws as the 3DO version, not being able to punch left or brake. It does move a bit more smoothly, however. I still can't believe I traded in the superior Sega CD version for this one back in the 90s. Not like that one was great either, but it was better. Oh, check this out. The 32X has Motocross Championship. Now, everyone knows that this is a bad, truly awful game. But you know what? I appreciate it more after playing Supercross 3D on the Jag. This plays better, looks better, and runs at a higher frame rate. Still, any little thing will make you fall. And what the hell's this? JPEG artifacts? Does this game think it's a Jaguar title? Hell yeah, Virtua Racing Deluxe is also here. This is a port of the arcade game, but it adds 2 new cars and 2 new tracks to race on. This was a launch title, and it really showed what the 32X could do. We've got solid polygon graphics that move quite fast. It looks better in both visual quality and frame rate than any of the polygonal racers on the Jaguar. The sound and music, of course, is typical Virtua Racing cheese, but it works well for the game. This is still a game that I have a lot of fun with, and it was the best home port for quite a while. For having the Need for Speed and especially Road Rash, the win goes to the 3DO. Second place is close, but it goes to the 32X because I personally prefer Virtua Racing Deluxe over Super Burnout. Uh-oh, we've got an evil 3-way tie so far. Now, this next category is just basically miscellaneous, games that I didn't want to throw in the other categories for whatever reason. Anyway, let's see who wins this. How about Virtuoso from Data East? You play as a dude who loves heavy metal, but hates crabs and seagulls. You'll even go to Mars to kill them. You know what else you hate? Snowmen. That's right, F snowmen. Okay, this game isn't great, but it's kind of funny. Return Fire got its start on the 3DO. This is basically a game of capture the flag and return it to your base, but you need to clear the way first. You have 4 different vehicles which do different things. I can't tell you the amount of hours I put in on this one, both single and multiplayer. It can get choppy, but it never gets boring. There's also Lucien's Quest from Microcabin. This is a JRPG. It's really rough with frame rates reaching the single digits. The battles have you clearing shrubbery out of the way in order to reach your enemies, but otherwise they work well. At least the 3DO has an RPG, even if it's only this one. Or how about Guardian War, also from Microcabin? This is a strategy RPG. It's weird looking for sure, but I played this a lot back in the day. It also has some great music, though it is a little muffled. Then there's Star Control 2 from Crystal Dynamics. I have absolutely no idea how to play this game. This kind of stuff definitely isn't my thing. But a lot of people seem to love it for whatever reason, so I figured I'd mention it because the 3DO has it. This is the only port of the game to a console. I've definitely got to mention Demolition Man from Virgin. Naturally, it has FMV clips from the movie, but it also includes new video that Sylvester Stallone shot exclusively for this game. It offers a lot of different playstyles from crosshair shooting, one-on-one fighting, first-person shooter, and even driving. Sadly, none of these are done very well at all. The crosshair moves with a weird acceleration which makes it tough to control. The fighting segments are very stiff. The driving sequence is just boring and dark. The best segments are the first-person shooter ones. However, they're still not great. Still, I love watching Sly trot along exclusively for the 3DO. I wonder if they gave him a 3DO when this game came out.
So it looks like you're the first action hero.
The 3DO had John Madden Football from Electronic Arts. This is an excellent football video game that plays just like the one on the Genesis. The graphics are fantastic for their time and feature a variable frame rate which is often pretty fast. Naturally, it's full of FMV clips here and there, but once again, this was the 90s. I'd say that this was the best sports game on the console. There was also golf, and the best one is Pebble Beach Golf Links from T&E Soft. It plays like a typical T&E Soft golf game, and it's much better than PGA Tour 96 on this same console. This one only has one course though. Unfortunately, there's no Craig Stadler on the 3DO here. Club Drive from Atari on the Jaguar isn't a racing game. Instead, you're a toy car and you drive around collecting Powerballs. The graphics are actually pretty smooth. I think the game would be a lot more fun if it let you out of the house sooner. As it is, you might get bored with this one before you leave the initial room. Tempest 2000 from Llamasoft is an update to, well, Tempest. Now this is how you do an update. Everything here is great. You have trippy visuals that are still very much Tempest. The control works fine even with a D-pad, though fans have made rotary controllers that work with this game. The music is outstanding, and it's another one that sounds like an Amiga mod file, but it totally works for this game. Despite the extremely simple arcade premise, this one always manages to keep me wanting more and is a standout title in the Jaguar's library. Iron Soldier from Eclipse is pretty cool. You pilot the world's slowest and most unresponsive mech. Your mission varies by stage, but it's usually to take out a certain target. The movement control takes a bit to get used to, but I like what they did here. You just really need to be careful as the enemies will be on your ass like you won't believe. The 2D graphics don't even have any JPEG artifacts. Is this even the Jaguar? The music is great as well. Iron Soldier 2 came to both cartridge and CD, and this is the CD version. This is basically more of the same, with maybe a few more texture-mapped objects and a CD soundtrack. Naturally, it also has some FMV. If you like the first game, well, here you go. Fortunately, NBA Jam Tournament Edition from Acclaim is a winner. This is a great port of the arcade game which pretty much has everything. You've got the player scaling, the line-scrolling floors, most if not all of the voices, and decent music. They didn't have to sacrifice the gameplay at all as this one plays fast and good. A great time here for sure.
From downtown! Sweet touch!
Battlemorph is, you guessed it, a sequel to Cybermorph. This CD game is a worthy sequel too. You do a lot more than just fly around and collect objects. You now have detailed missions this time. Hell, you can even fly underwater. Be careful about your speed though. It's easy to go too fast and things can get a little twitchy. The graphics have improved a little bit and the music is great. This honestly would have been a more appropriate pack-in for the Jaguar CD than Blue Lightning. I really enjoy the 32X version of Blackthorn from Interplay. It's one of those cinematic platformers which I usually don't enjoy very much, but this one's different. Somehow they got the control right and I'm able to get into it much more than the likes of Prince of Persia or Flashback. One real cool thing about this one is that it's running almost entirely on the 32X. It's doing all of the graphics and all of the sounds and music. And then there's Metalhead from Sega. You're a mech roaming the area and destroying other mechs. It's kind of similar to Iron Storm on the Jag, but it's fully texture mapped, your mech moves faster, and overall it's more arcadey. It's certainly not perfect though, as the texture mapping looks kinda chunky. The music is also pretty abrasive, but there are tons and tons of voices here for a cartridge game. It does get a bit boring after a while, but it's fun for a short burst.
You must eliminate all mechs from your area.
Or how about Star Trek Starfleet Academy Starship Bridge Simulator? I forget how to play this one and relearning it would take a while. But even though this game sounds boring, it can actually be a lot of fun. This is another game where the 32X does all of the graphics and audio. I recommend it if you like stuff like this. NBA Jam Tournament Edition has a 32X version. This one has most things: the player scaling, the line-scrolling floors, and great gameplay. It's missing a few voices though, and the music is pretty simple sounding. Also, the graphics aren't as good as the Jaguar game. This still plays quite well though, and you can't go wrong with this one.
Head fake. Sweet touch.
There's also T-Mech from Time Warner Interactive. Basically, you're a futuristic death sled and you need to hunt down and destroy other death sleds. Whoever has the most kills when the time runs out wins. This is a little better with multiplayer, otherwise this one loses its luster rather quickly. Excellent. Here's Star Wars, the arcade game. I debated putting this and the next game in the shooter segment, but that was already pretty crowded. This was a launch game and you can tell it was rushed. If you like shooting down TIE fighters who are extremely good at evading you, then you'll love this. I do like how the flat shaded polygons look though. Finally, we have Zaxxon Mother Base 2000. This game has an isometric perspective. It's one hit and you die, but you get set back, which means you need to slowly work your way back to where you were. Not the best shooter, and really only called Zaxxon because of the perspective. It had promise, but it didn't live up to it. Each platform is fairly strong in this random category, all things considered, but the 3DO edges out the rest. And second place goes to the Jaguar over the 32X. And there you have it. The 3DO is the best console of all time, the 32X the worst console of all time, and the Jaguar the most average console of all time. Those are the rules. Wow, I honestly thought the score would end up being further apart in the end. So which consoles do you think was best? Did you ever even bother with any of them? I'm guessing most of you didn't, which honestly is understandable. Anyway, let me know what you thought. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack. If you're a fan of the TurboGrafx-16 or PC Engine, then you know that Hue cards come with these little plastic sleeves. And well, over the decades, the plastic in these things can break down and they become gooey and sticky, and if you're not careful, they can actually damage your Hue cards. For a while I was using these plastic business card sleeves, and they work, but they're a tight fit. That's what she said. But then I discovered these brand new sleeves from PCE Works, and they're made specifically for HuCards. I tell you, this is a game changer for your HuCard collection. Smells like brand new plastic and
Joe, sorry to disturb your moment there, but do you want to show us how the sleeves fit on a HuCard?
Oh yeah, and they fit perfectly.
Joe? Joe? Hello? I think we got a problem here, guys. Joe?